Welcome to Breaking Silence, a safe and brave space where we have real conversations about race in America.
Okay.
Okay, next question.
Our next question is, what kind of communities and school systems did you grow up in? So I'll start first. We moved around a lot as a child. I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. Don't remember going to school there. After that, we moved to Indiana. I don't remember going to school there. And then after that, we moved to West Virginia. A very white state. A small town called Parkersburg. And we lived there. Oh, I'm sorry. Before that, we were in Washington, D.C. We moved to Maryland and lived in Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C., definitely very diverse. I remember going to a private school. It was a Muslim school, and by far, a Black school. There were some brown people in it too, but mainly African American and Black people in that school. And I probably went to that school for 3 years as a child. I'm talking about like pre-K, kindergarten, first grade maybe, and then transferred to a public school after that, still in Maryland and in the DC area, so very diverse. We lived in a poor community. I remember riding the bus to our apartment complex and waiting for the bus in the apartment complex. That was definitely the projects, I would say. It was definitely low income housing. So was exposed to lots of Black people and brown people and immigrants there. Then we moved to West Virginia, and it was super white. And really, I think it was just me, my family, and then maybe one other family that had biracial children. I don't remember any Black people besides my dad. The other family with biracial children, the Black dad had, I don't know where he was. But he wasn't there. And so very whitewashed. All my friends there were white. It's really funny, but the first boy who ever liked me was another biracial boy in that other family. So it's like the Black people come together, I guess. And yeah, so biracial people only were the only Black people. And then there was some random Indian girl here or there, but very, very white. And then after West Virginia, we moved to Georgia. And I spent 6 years in Georgia, very diverse in Georgia. I was in Metro Atlanta area, so very diverse in both of the high schools that I went to. I went to a college in northern Georgia that was super white. It's Berry College in Rome, Georgia. And the statistic there that we even had printed on our t-shirts was 3%. There was 3% Black people in that school. And I remember in our Black Student Alliance t-shirts, we put 3% and rising. So very white again, but the Black people, we did find each other and stick together. And then after Georgia, I moved out after college. I moved and started my life and met you in Florida. So that's been my journey. So been in communities that were mostly Black, mostly white, and then also some diversity too. So
how did going from a predominantly Black school to a primarily white school, did that affect you at all?
I was so young. I don't think it affected me. I was in like elementary school still. So I don't remember that affecting me. I remember wanting to be friends with the cool kids who were the cheerleaders, but there was one mixed girl on the squad that was good. But besides that, I don't remember much of anything that was different. I was super young, so I might not even have yet been aware of my difference at that time.
Okay. We did not move around a lot when I was growing up. So I grew up in the same house my whole life until I went to college. In New England. It was a very white community. As I mentioned, we had a couple of immigrant families in our neighborhood. One of those families, they were white. even though they had immigrated. And then the other family, they were brown, but I don't know where they were from. We weren't super close with them, but just if you pass each other on the street or whatnot and had a conversation kind of thing. So my school, I went to a very small private school, about a half an hour from my house. So even though race was not really talked about in my family, I would say class was I was very aware of class differences, because the school that I went to, I mean, there was kids that went to that school whose parents, one parent was a doctor or a lawyer, very successful. Other parent might be stay at home, and they belong to the country club, and the kids got new cars for their 16th birthday and all of that. And that was not my experience going to that school. My experience was it took 3 generations of my family to all pitch in to be able to afford the tuition for me to go to that school. So there was a lot of sacrifices made on my family's behalf for me to be able to go there and get the education that I did, which I'm very grateful for. But so there was like 40 students in my grade for the majority. Like I went K through 12 the whole time. And in middle school, we had, there was, I think, two children who were Indian. Like their parents had moved from India, so they were the first generation growing up here. And we had an Asian boy in our class, but we did not have any Black students in my specific grade. And it wasn't until high school, I think so our whole high school, again, was very small. I think we had under 300 students in the entire high school, because my class had 40 and we were the biggest grade. And then I think there was one African-American or Black girl in the entire high school, and she was several grades ahead of me. So, she wanted to be my friend because I was a stupid freshman. And, but I was really good friends with the Indian girl that was in my grade school, and she went to a different high school, so we kind of drifted apart after that. But there was 3 of us who were super close, and those are really the first conversations that I remember having around like skin color and race. And she would share stories with me, and normal struggles. I think that any child whose parents moved from another country and they have all of these different like cultural norms, whether it's religion or food or clothing, and she really wanted to fit in with her American friends, and her parents are trying to help her learn her background and her culture. So we had a lot of conversations about that. And we would joke, like we did this thing where you'd like crisscross hands, and she was really brown and I was really white, so we'd like joke about like Oreos and stuff like that. But we talked about this, like you're my first Black friend, and I did not become friends with you until was it 23, 24?
I believe you were 25, if my math was correct. It was 13 years ago in 2007.
Yeah, so I was somewhere between 24 and 25. But anyway, I feel like my initial conversations with anyone around race, because it was someone who was not Black, it was almost more comfortable, because I think that there's just so much baggage and weight, that just comes with the whole conversation between white people and Black people or biracial people, that she didn't have that. My little friend and we didn't have any of that. And so it was okay to acknowledge that I was white and she was brown, and we would joke about it and we would talk about it, and neither one of us thought any differently of the other person because of it. And that was that. And I think that was really my foundation for all that moving forward. And an aha that I've even had in having these conversations with you, and we talk about like, oh, are you colorblind? Are you not? Whatever. Like I have had so many conversations with people from the Latinx community about, I've never even thought about it, but like we talk about food, and we talk about language, and we talk about skin color, we talk about hair, we've had all of those conversations, and it's fine. But it's like, I've known you for 13 years and I'm scared to bring it up because it's just not the same, right? Like having a conversation with somebody from Puerto Rico is not the same as having a conversation with a Black person who grew up here.
Where do you think that comes from then? If the way you grew up, it was never an issue, your parents treated everybody with kindness and respect, people's color didn't come to the forefront, how did it come to the point where you're, even as a child and you have friends, you realize that it's more comfortable to have the conversation with this immigrant versus an African American person? Like, where do you think that comes from? Like, how do we just all like naturally know that this conversation is not going to be as comfortable?
Well, and she was born here, so she did not. Her parents immigrated, just to clarify. But well, I think when I was younger, it was just a lack of. There were literally no Black people around me. Like they were not in my school. They were not in my community, and so I don't know what I would have done or how I would have acted if that were the case. But I think as the school that I went to did do an exceptional job of teaching us about history, like American history, and just what slavery meant, how the Civil War played out, even prior to that, right? Manifest Destiny and us tearing across the entire country and taking land that was not ours, and Jim Crow laws and segregation and all of that. So like we didn't have a separate class that was, African American studies or African American history. It was American history, but this was our history, and like this is what happened, and this was the real deal. And nobody sugarcoated that.
I'm just trying to imagine like an all-white classroom, all-white teachers really digging deep and not sugarcoating going into this. And like, what does that conversation look like? What questions do people have? What pieces are unable to be addressed because you don't have that diversity? And then also the uncomfortableness of having a classroom that might have one or two Black people, and then the questions are asked and those one or two Black people have to give their take on it. So that brings up a whole nother situation for me on what's ideal. Like when learning about these things as a child and as an adult, what's the ideal group of learners? Like, so that we can learn from each other as well as the content.
Well, let me add one clarifying statement when I say like it was not sugar-coated. There are probably Black people who would have sat in that room and been like, you are totally sugar-coating this. So let me just clarify that when I say it was not sugar-coated, I mean it was not depicted in a way where it was like, oh yeah, like Manifest Destiny, we did this amazing thing. No, like we were messed up. That there was no justification for slavery. Like it was bad. We did the wrong thing. It was not right. But there's probably stories and history from the Black community that are much more real and raw that, to your point, we never knew or learned or talked about simply because we didn't have the representation, or maybe because they thought we were too young to learn about those things, that we would talk about things like hanging trees and whatnot, but it's not like there was very detailed stories that were shared. Yeah. So just want to acknowledge the fact that I recognize that there are different levels of sugarcoating that could or could not have happened, but that the history was presented in a way that recognized the steamrolling that happened and just the level of expected supremacy that was there. So even though, I never owned a slave, like I never owned a plantation, you just know the history of it, like what happened and how that played out and these decisions that people made. And even, seeing what happened in the 60s and all of that, it just, when you're a kid, how do you even begin to engage in that conversation? And then I think the older that you get, the more taboo it becomes.
Okay.
So there's just more and more, whether it's what you don't see people talking about or you do see people talking about in the news or when you're out and about or going through corporate diversity programs, because I feel like the programs I've gone through have also encouraged just not acknowledging it, aside from making sure you have a diverse candidate pool if you're hiring for a position. But it's, like, hey, diversity program, what I need to know is all of this stuff just happened with George Floyd, and I work with people who are Black. Like, when I come into work tomorrow, am I supposed to say something? Am I supposed to not say something? Am I supposed to open the conversation? Am I supposed to let them lead it? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? Because if I feel like I should say something, but maybe I shouldn't say something.
That's a good point. Yeah, like, did companies with diversity officers and programs and departments, did they step up to provide that? And I know just from talking to some of my friends, some of our companies did and some didn't. So that's a good point. Okay. All right, we have 2 questions left.
Okay.
One was specifically for you. Did you have any Black teachers or any Black person growing up that had an impact on your life? Teachers or friends, anybody as you were younger growing up that has had a lasting impact on your life?
I don't think that I had Black teachers. So, I mean, the quick answer would be no, right? There's nobody that comes to mind. But I've already shared a little bit about the fact that where I grew up and the school that I went to was not the most diverse group. So.
Okay. And then the last question is, also some people might be wondering that question about me too. So I will say I did have Black teachers in elementary school. I do not remember any of them. It would have had to be early elementary school. I'm talking about 1st grade, 2nd grade, like early. I don't remember any of them. There was a Black professor at Berry College that I know was influential in a lot of my Black friends' lives. I never connected with her, actually. I know she was a huge part of a lot of their experiences, how they made it through college, how they see themselves. I knew her. We were friendly, we were fine. We met a couple years ago just in a restaurant randomly here in LA, and it was good to just catch up for a minute, but I never really connected with her like other people did. And so I would say no, I don't necessarily have a mentor or anyone like that. I do have some Black friends from growing up that I still keep in touch with, via Facebook. But I wouldn't say like they had a big impact on my life.
Okay.
All right, our last question is, how did having talks about race with your family, with your friends growing up, or the lack of having talks about race affect other aspects of your life, i.e. who you choose to love, how you see yourself, differences in how you show up now as an adult? Okay, so that question is going to take, I feel like a life of thinking and exploring and coming to terms with. I think right away, the lack of having race talks, how it affected how I saw myself and how I chose to love myself was big. So I mentioned a little bit earlier before, but I do remember being happy that I could say that my mother was white. And this taps right into colorism, which I know we'll talk about on a future episode. But I remember being like a junior high or high grades in elementary school, maybe like 5th, 6th grade, where girls would purposefully love to say, oh, I'm a quarter Native American, or I've got Indian in my blood, or I'm 25% white, or whatever. Like, people would jump over themselves just to tell you about a little drop of anything that wasn't Black that was in their blood. because we felt like it made us cooler, better, more popular, prettier. So I do remember always being happy that I could say, like, I'm half white. Like, I don't have to search and pull and plug like my mom is white. I'm happy to say that. And now I bring that up because I realize now that me taking joy out of saying that really meant more that I was not happy and comfortable with myself and who I was fully. I was trying to be closer to white, lighter. I was trying to differentiate myself because of my whiteness. And I think if I had talks with my parents, with my family, with a mentor, with anyone about just how we see ourselves in the world and what's valuable and what's beautiful and what's strong and what's respectable and admirable about who I am, I think that would have avoided some of that. I did grow up thinking that, you know, I wasn't pretty. I wasn't ready to go unless my hair was straight for a long time, even until adulthood. It would be like, oh, if there's a special occasion, I'm going to straighten my hair. Or if I really want to look good, or if it's picture day, or if I'm going for a job interview, it has to be straight. My hair has to be straight. And I realize now that that is a form of self-hate. And I grew up with these feelings and not realizing that I had the feelings until I was an adult. So I would have liked that for that reason. And I think that that affected how good I saw myself as, you know, the quality of a person I saw myself as and where I felt like I belonged most. And then just like, I don't think it affected who I choose to love outside of myself. I think it has a lot to do with like my self-esteem, my self-worth. I don't think it affected who I choose to love. I've dated people from all over, and I don't think that my race talks had anything to do with that. I honestly think it's how I look has a lot to do with that, and we can talk about that a little bit later as well in another episode. But I've dated all sorts of races and nationalities, and yeah. So that's really all I have to say about that. I think it affected how I love myself more than anything, and in a negative way, because I didn't get to have those conversations.
What helped you shift then as you got older?
What helped me? I think representation in the media, in magazines. I think the trend of natural hair being acceptable, being okay, being something that was pretty and valued. And again, this is all outside of me, right? It took validation from outside of myself for me to find peace and love inside myself. So I think that is one thing. And then I think having adult relationships with Black people where we could talk through these things and I could hear other experiences that were different than my own and realize, oh, okay, I think I'm missing some of this understanding. I'm missing some of this exposure, and it really helped my mindset.
Yeah, I've been, since you shared the question, I've been trying to think because, and I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna, right? But I think that there's positives to it and there are consequences to it. So I'll start with the consequence, I think, which is just a delay in awareness or understanding. I think that the fact that I did not have a lot of Black people in my life, and so I could not have the same experience with them that I did with my friends from grade school. Like I missed that opportunity of innocence when you're young, where you kind of ask those questions and you learn and you gain insight into what someone else's life may be like and how it may be different from your own before you're aware of all this other, I keep saying baggage, but I don't know a better way to phrase, you know, just the heaviness that our history brings with the conversation. So because of that, I think it stunted or delayed my ability to have these kinds of conversations. And I just think about like what missed opportunities have there been because we waited so long, or because I waited so long, and what could have happened if, you know, the first 6 months that we were friends, you and I went out and got a coffee or grabbed a drink and were able to have a conversation like this. Or if I was able to have conversations with you like I have with my, you know, Hispanic friends, about the things that they see and they experience. So I think probably just opportunity cost for me would be the biggest detriment to my family not talking openly about race when I was young. I think an indirect positive that I've gained from that, though, was I did not have them telling me what to think, and I did not have them telling me what to believe. And so I was able to come to my own conclusions, and I was able to base my treatment of others both through their example of how I saw them treating other people and how I would want to be treated. So I don't know, I guess what I'm saying is that the positive of it is that I was never told to be blind to it. And so that has made me, I think, more open to having the conversations. I was never told that it was a bad thing. And to not have conversations. It was just something that I think social influences guided me. And I think that if my parents had had those types of conversations with me, I'd probably have a much stronger aversion to engaging and leaning into these types of things, because, you know, what your parents tell you, that shapes you.
I thought it was interesting that you thought about it from a, you know, what are some good effects and what are some bad effects of this? When I heard the question, I was like, I don't like, if we would have had the talks, then I would have had some good. But the fact that I didn't have any, I immediately saw that as only bad. So I thought it was really interesting that you see like an like indirect positive thing. So basically you're saying, like, am I hearing you saying that not having the talks allowed you to shape your own feelings and identities, and although that it was delayed, at least you came to it on your own without any influence and maybe undue weight of what your parents thought affecting what you think.
Yeah, because have had conversations with people whose parents were very active in telling them, like, don't see color. I mean, that was not a conversation that ever happened in my family. All I saw was that my mom, my grandmother, my dad, my grandfather would talk about everybody equally. And so I think that it like sets a tone, you know, or I used to do a lot of errands and stuff with my grandmother. So if we were out in the store, you know, my grandmother would say hello to everybody. It didn't matter what you looked like. So me seeing her treat people that way, I think influenced me. And maybe in their head they were thinking like, oh, I don't see color, but they never told me that. And so all I had to go by was how you're treating and how you're interacting with people, but there was no judgment or self-talk in my head about whether it was good or bad, or I should or I shouldn't. Does that help? I'm having a really hard time, I think, trying to articulate it, but hopefully that's a little bit more clear. But the definite consequence is simply that I had to get there on my own, and so it took me much longer than it would have if I think they had sat me down and said, here's what we believe, here's how we treat people, this is why we treat people this way, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know if that's even what they would have told me. You know, they might have told me, just pretend you don't see color, which, I mean, clearly if I can see and I can see you, I know like what color you are. So.
Okay.
And just to add on as well, not to make it something that is rosier than it ought to be, but because nobody in my family was telling me things like, oh, you can only date boys who look like this, or you can only date boys who are this particular religion, or whatever it may be, like this occupation. Because none of those conversations happened, I never felt restricted. I never felt unsure or second guessed myself in who I was dating or who I was choosing to love, based on skin color, background, nationality, those types of things. So that was never really an issue. It was really more, um, you know, are you attracted to them? Are they a good person? Are they treating you well? Those types of things. So.
And I think that also might be a good point, because the fact that you didn't have those race talks about race in your family, you didn't have any negative talk about it. You also didn't have anybody's well-intended advice or feedback. So it made me think of something that happened recently in my family, where one of my brothers was given advice that if you don't want baby mama drama, then you should date a white woman, because white women will give you almost none, almost zero baby mama drama if you have a child with them. So like that happened in 2020 to my brother. And so I'm just thinking, like, if you were younger, and even if you had race talks and your parents weren't racist, but they were just giving you some advice of what they've seen, and this is just their opinion, that could have affected how you saw other races. So I think it's not something for us to take lightly, like, oh, well, they didn't talk about it, so I didn't have any restrictions of who I could bring home. I think it's even more than that. Now that I was exposed to that example, it's just how you see other people. Like, yeah, maybe it'd be okay if I bring a brown person home, but I know that my whoever did say that the drama comes with this type of person, so I just got to be ready to combat that, or on my toes to make sure it doesn't happen, or if any red flags happen, to get out.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it made me think of. So, well, I want to thank our viewers for taking the time to ask questions, to be interested, and to use this information as they see and hear future conversations from us, because each person's experience is different, is individual, and I think the opinions and experiences that you hear us share, they are shaped by this history and what we've shared with you all today. So hopefully it was helpful in understanding where we're coming from, and in getting a glimpse into two friends who have been friends for 13 years who have never asked each other these questions. I literally found out this morning that I was Jen's first Black friend. I thought she was kidding. So hopefully that's beneficial to others as they start to have these conversations too, because I mean, the fact of the matter is the conversations just aren't happening. And what I learned today is they weren't happening as children. And so maybe we didn't even have that role modeled for us. And that was a miss too, because if we didn't see it happening as young people, it's even harder to just start it ourselves as older people. So really a big takeaway for me when I think about my effect on children that are around me currently, my 6-year-old niece, my 8-year-old nephew. So that's my takeaway from what I learned from you today. So thanks.
Okay, well, if you were still with us, thank you for watching our episode about how our past has shaped us. We would like to encourage you to utilize some of these questions, or even send us other questions that maybe we did not dive into, but use these questions as you are having conversations with your friends, regardless of their race. A lot of times, we meet people and we don't ever kind of go backwards and think about how the things from our childhood, our adolescence and young adulthood shaped us and who we are today. I know I've learned so much about Aziza and even about myself, just as we've been going through these questions.
And I think that's a key point too, even taking these questions and asking ourselves first to see, and maybe challenging some of those memories or digging deep into those memories to see, where did I come from? Why do I think this way? Oh, okay, I guess I really never had these conversations, or these were the conversations that I did have that shaped how I feel now. So taking a moment to have some self-reflection with these questions as well. So thanks to the viewers who did provide the thought-provoking questions for us. All right. And the quote that still hangs heavy on my mind every time we have conversations like this is what I have shared in the past. Now is not the time to be fragile.
And continue to choose kindness as you're engaging in these conversations, sending us your feedback on what you're thinking. Let us know how we're doing, and be good to each other. Bye all.